Hi there, Chris from TotallyEV, and here I'm doing a dedicated audio review of the Skoda Elroq. If you want a detailed review of the vehicle itself, make sure you check it up on your pop-up banner or by following the links down the description below or the pinned comments. Now, to kick things off, we have to talk about its audio configuration. And as standard across the entire trim range, you've got an 8-speaker setup. Unfortunately, at the time of filming, the manufacturer has not provided me any sort of extra detail in terms of the wattage or indeed the driver sizes. If I do get this, I'll pop it as a video note or indeed include it within the description. However, where I do have some additional information is on the 12-speaker 675 Watts Canton audio system. It's only present in the Edition and Sport line trims in form of the Advanced package, which does provide you a whole bunch of other goodies, but will set you back a whopping £2,250 or £4,150, depending on which trim level you go for. Now, to break this down for you, at the center of the dashboard, you have got a 90mm driver. Then you have got 19mm tweeters that are found within each of the A-pillars, 168mm base drivers and 90mm mid-range drivers within the front doors, and then 168mm mid-base driver and 19mm tweeters that are found within each of the rear doors. And to complete the system, you have got a subwoofer in the boot. Now, for you to tinker around with the audio drivers, you'll want to navigate on the 13-inch touchscreen display. And here I've left the balance and fader and the sound focus in terms of their default configuration, in other words at all, and in terms of the center position. As for the surround, I've added one notch, and I'll touch upon why further down in this video. As for the sound tab, I've actually gone on an individual EQ profile, because here you've got a 6-band EQ to play around with. I've left the subwoofer and the bass at default. I've taken one notch off mid-bass, added one notch to mid and mid-treble, and added 2 notches to treble. Of course, these are my subjective settings, and therefore your settings might differ from mine. Now, for you to connect up to the infotainment system, you have got Bluetooth with the SBC and AAC codec supported only. So therefore, you might want to use it sparingly in order to get better audio fidelity. In other words, you might want to connect up to Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, which are supported over a wireless and wired format. The latter actually being preferred out of the two because it'll give you the utmost audio fidelity, at least if you're streaming music directly from your smartphone. So moving swiftly on, we get onto cabin noise, and here the objective measurements will be on your screen. Now, I would just like to highlight that the vehicle on review has got the optional 20-inch alloys that are fitted. If you want even lower rolling noise, you might want to opt for the 19-inch alloys instead. However, here, the Edition model and the Sport line trims, where the former is actually on review in terms of the trim level, does give you acoustically treated side windows, and that definitely affects your overall cabin noise. From my own subjective opinion, I'll say that the cabin noise that you get within the Elroq is actually among one of the best in its class, if not one of the best that I've actually ever tested. Indeed, it's actually really serene, be it when you're driving at lower or indeed higher speeds. So what Skoda have actually been able to deliver when it comes to cabin insulation should certainly be commended. Now, with all that said and done, let's get on to an audio demo. I'll be placing the camera and microphone in a few different locations within the cabin and playing back pre-SJ track, which is titled Like Me. So I appreciate an audio demo over YouTube is not quite ideal, but I thought I'd provide it as it gives you a bit of a taster as to what to expect. Now, from my opinion, from someone who's reviewed over 130 in-car audio systems and over 800 audio-related devices, I've actually been left really impressed by the 12-speaker Canton audio system. Now, let me break it down for you. First off, in terms of that subwoofer, which delivers that sub-bass tone, or in other words, that low-end rumble that you'll come to expect in more bass-orientated tracks, well, you can certainly hear and feel it. In fact, it's really nice to see that you've got a dedicated subwoofer band that you can adjust via the infotainment system. With that said, the subwoofer isn't exactly as good as some of the more premium audio systems out there on the market, in that it doesn't give you those lower tones, in other words, that lower echelons of the frequency range, and therefore does feel a little bit cut off in certain instances. I think most consumers won't really complain, but some audiophiles out there might have expected a little bit better. This is where a aftermarket solution might come in handy, and something that you might want to consider, at least if you're a serious audio nut. Now, as for the mid-bass tones, they're actually pretty hearty. Both at the front and rear of the cabin, you've got those audio drivers that are found within the doors, and they actually deliver a pretty healthy slam while also sounding pretty controlled. No complaints whatsoever, and in fact, in my case, as someone who listens to a lot of R&B, D&B, and also dance music, I actually reduced one notch via the infotainment system because I felt it was a little bit overpowering. Now, this does actually bring me on to its overall mid-range, which unfortunately is a little bit recessed and pushed back. Both for male and female vocals, they don't really come up to the foreground. And in this respect, the Elroq's audio system really can't compete with the likes of the Tesla Model Y, which I think is one of its nearest competitors. Indeed, over here, the mids aren't exactly its forte, and therefore you should just expect a little bit of a V-shaped sound signature. Now, you might be quick to say, why didn't you just add extra notches via the infotainment system? In other words, really boosting that mid-range frequency tone. Well, the simple answer is because by adding more to the mid or the mid-treble EQ, it takes away from the overall accuracy and therefore gives you a bit more of a veiled sound. As a result, I just had to accept that it has a somewhat warmer sound signature and that the mids aren't exactly the strongest point of this audio system. However, the highs do actually extend relatively well. Both at the front and rear of the cabin, you've got dedicated tweeters, and therefore means that you've got that sort of toe-tapping feeling. It doesn't sound overly harsh or sibilant either, and therefore, when it comes to ear fatigue, well, I didn't have any sort of problems on longer drives, and including at louder volumes. Now, when it comes to its overall soundstage reproduction, it's actually done really well. The instrument separation is certainly there, and that is also thanks to the fact that you've got a number of audio drivers within the cabin, including that center audio drivers that's positioned within the dashboard. And as for the overall width and depth, well, it certainly feels there. This is in part thanks to the fact that you've got a relatively small cabin, at least for an electric SUV. However, make no mistake that in comparison to some of the other audio systems out there on the market, which offer you even more drivers that are found within the cabin, well, here the Elroq can't quite compete, because as a reminder, you have got 11 speakers to play around with the 12th being the subwoofer. Now, ultimately, what I'm trying to say over here is that the audio system that's comprised within the Elroq actually does do really well across the sound frequency range, at least when it comes to the Canton audio system, and as a result, it gets our Performance Audio Award. It is a shame, however, that this system is not offered as an individual option, be it in terms of the top spec trims or indeed the cheaper trims, and indeed isn't even offered at all for those people who are going, for example, for the SE or the SEL, which I do think is quite disappointing, because here you'll be left with an 8-speaker setup instead, which will suffice for most consumers yet again, but for those people that just want that extra bit of audio prowess, then that Canton audio system really would have come in clutch. Hopefully Skoda can address this, but I suspect they'll actually stick to their guns and offer it within a package. Now, I'd be curious to know what you make of the audio system of the Skoda Elroq down in the comment section below, and how you feel about this sort of package policy. Now, if you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I hope you see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.